Hey guys, welcome back to Gear 4. Today we're taking a look at the Boruit V20, a 2024 refresh of their V10. So before we get into it, I just have to say this was sent along for review by Boruit. They reached out to me after seeing a previous comment on my V15 video that somebody was interested in seeing what I thought of this, and they very kindly sent it along. That said, they did not provide any financial compensation, nor do they have any input into my opinion on this, but I do try and keep in mind that I'm a little financially detached from the product as I got it for free, and it does give a little bit of a good impression when you get stuff. So I'm just trying to make sure that does not affect my review process whatsoever. Now let's start off with a size comparison before we get into the actual overview of the design. So on top we have our mainstay of 58mm Swiss Army knife classic, and down below we have a 91mm. And we'll try and give some thickness references for that as well. And here it is next to a twisty light. This is the EDC01 from Lumentop. And a more standard reference, a AAA battery. And a comparison that some people might want to make, this is the V15. Basically, these in terms of overall size are very similar. This is basically just kind of shrunk down a little bit in all dimensions. So it's a little narrower, it's a little shorter, and it's overall just a little smaller. Taking a look at the overall design here, we have an ABS plastic body with an aluminium head for the front lights with two separate rubber switches. It does come pre-mounted with a reversible clip. And then you can see back here we have a flat bottom, so this does tail stand. However, they have included a lanyard hole here and a magnet, so this can be attached to ferrous surfaces. And then the head itself does do a full 180 degrees here. And something else, see if you guys can hear. So this is actually using a ratcheting mechanism, which is in contrast to the V15, which only had 80 degrees of movement, but it was a smooth movement, whereas this is using kind of a ratcheting hinge. It's very satisfying to use, to be honest, and I do really appreciate that this can now go a full 90 degrees. I think that makes it far more useful. And then on the back we have all of the this branding is actually, I don't think, part of the case. I think this is part of the actual battery or just general innards of the flashlight, and you're just seeing it because it's in a translucent case. A note on the case as well, this is actually glow in the dark. See if we can give you guys a quick, there we go, so you can kind of see that, but I will throw an image of it up on screen as well. And with that, let's get into the UI. So we have two buttons here. Now basically, assuming the markings there, the lightning bolt symbol is going to be controlling the side lights and the front red LEDs. As you can see here, we have 4 LEDs. We have 2 with tier optics. These are the white lights. And then we have 2 smaller ones here with more traditional reflectors, and those are red lights that face forwards. So the lightning bolt is going to contain the red and the sides, whereas the normal power button symbol is going to work your front white LEDs. Now this does have a very similar design in terms of UI for the V15, but with one exception, and that is including an additional feature. So as you see back here, we do have a little kind of grill. That's because that is a speaker. We have a kind of a personal siren, personal alarm kind of thing that I'm going to show off first. So just be warned, for the next 10 seconds there's going to be a loud sound included. So if you push and hold this whilst the flashlight is off, you're going to trigger the flashing lights here and a somewhat loud noise from here. That's reasonably loud. I'm not sure if that's loud in terms of personal sirens. I wouldn't particularly say so, but we'll get more into that later. And then to actually get into the side functions, you then want to just double click this. We'll also get into this, There we go. So once it's on, just pressing once will then step through all of them. So this is currently on the UV mode, and then we step down through, and this is a green light, normal red, a blue light, flashing red, alternating red and blue, and then white. This is a cold white, and none of these side lights have any alternate brightnesses. Hold to turn it off, and then pressing 3 times will get you into the front red. Again, this does not have any variable brightnesses. Gives you quite a clear hotspot, very bright, and again you can just press and hold to turn that off. And then on the right hand side, it's much similar story. If we press and hold from off, this is going to get into our turbo mode. And then to get into the modes properly, we just press twice. As you can see, there is some difficulty here. One hour later, and then once this is on, you can just press and step through the different brightnesses. Very simple, very like the V15. But whilst we are on the UI, let's just discuss what just happened. This is all about cadence of button presses. Whilst the UIs are very similar between these, the timing between button presses is quite frankly weird on the V20. So the V15 works as you would expect any flashlight to work. When it asks for a double click, it just wants a quick double click. This is how all flashlights I've encountered handle multiple clicks. They tend to want them to be fast. This is a Sofern. Double click quickly, right? Like, it wants quick double clicks. This doesn't actually work on the V20. If you double click quickly, you get nothing. You see that? So you basically have to click right at the end of when the first click is sounding, if that makes sense. And it's really hard to get used to, and it's very hard to transition out of this light and then back into it and then be able to reliably do it again. I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue if you don't carry or use many lights and you're intending to buy this and stick with it. However, that is definitely a pain point for me. I don't understand it, especially since the V15 is another Boruit light. I don't think it's that old either. And it's using an entirely different, timing for the switch presses. That's actually quite a noticeable issue in my opinion. But before we go on beyond into the good and bad, I just wanted to touch on that. But first, let's go into the brightnesses and run times of this little guy. So you can pause to read this more in depth yourself, but I will also read it aloud. So for the main front white lights, the moonlight is 5 lumens and goes for 33 hours. Low is 130 before stepping down to 30 lumens for 13.5 hours. Then medium is 6.5 hours of 300 lumens stepping down to 80. High, 600 lumens before stepping down to 150 for a total of 3.5 hours. And turbo is a total of 2.5 hours starting at 1000 lumens and going down to 200. The side lights, the white will last for 17 hours and is rated at 30 lumens. The same is true for basically everything but the blue, which is rated at 5 and lasts for 16 hours. The red still lasts for 17 hours but is only rated for 15. Now, something I want to point out here is that there is no mention of step down times in the manual. This is typically unusual. Normally when you have a step down, it will give you 2 numbers. So for example, on a lot of flashlights, turbo may last for 60 seconds, and then it will just say, so it'll say 60 and then like 120 and whatever the remaining brightness is. It does not do this. Something else to point out is also that you get step downs on medium and low. This really smacks of trying to inflate the lumen count for those modes when it's very clear that the light cannot sustain them, be it for thermal issues or battery performance. Now this is again a first for me with this light. Again, the V20, the V15 did not do this. It didn't give a step down time, but it only had a step down in the high mode, which makes more sense. And what's very confusing here for me is that, yes, 130 and 300 sounds impressive on a light of this size, but you don't necessarily want a low mode 130 lumens bright on a light this size. I would have much rather have seen more economical lumen counts that didn't step down. I think that would be a lot more sensible, to be honest. But whilst we've got the manual out, let's take a look at what you get in the box. So this is how the light arrives. It comes with these silicone diffusers on the ends. These are not the highest quality diffusers that I've ever seen. The size is also a little... I would have preferred them to be a little bit longer, to be honest, because if you really get them on firmly, you don't have much space between the end of the reflector and the diffuser to diffuse. But they work fine. See? Gives you a nice diffused beam. You have the choice of white or kind of an orange. It's quite nice. And I like that they include this. I think diffusers are very useful, and I wish that more companies would include them as standard. I would also like if the white one glowed in the dark, but that's just a nice to have. You also get in the box a split ring, a very soft feeling little lanyard, which is quite a nice inclusion considering they have that nice lanyard hole design, and a USB-A to USB-C cable. So, with that said, let's get into the good of the Boruit V20. So it has to be said that just for how small this thing is and how light this thing is, you are getting a lot of features, right? You get very capable forward-facing white and red light, you get a lot of very capable side lights, you get included functionality of the rotating head and the magnetic tail, and it's in a very compact and very reasonably affordable price. This is about £30 or $30 standard. However, they appear to have a permanent voucher to bring that down, as quite a lot of vendors tend to do. So the value on this is pretty good. I'm happy with it, especially given like the amount of accessories and what they throw in. It feels like it's pretty decent value, and I've got no issues from that point of view. The whole 90 degree each way, 180 degree rotation is excellent. Now, I liked the rotation on the V15, but to be honest, I did wish it went all of the way. When you have it all the way like this, you can get full pointing. You could put this, on a shelf or stable surface over here whilst you're working on something over there. You could clip it to a cap and have it pointing straight down with a reversible clip. And the reversible clip is another strong point. I don't like the clip as much as the V15 just because it is smaller. I typically, the wider the clip, the easier time you're going to have in general. It gets just a little bit tighter. It's a little bit more finicky to use, but it works just fine. I don't have any complaints actually using it. I just tend to prefer the slightly wider clip of the V15. And this makes an excellent headlamp. The rotatable head, the choice of modes, the red light, this makes a very capable headlamp if you want to push it into service with a peaked cap, which I highly recommend doing that if a flashlight has it in store. It really cuts down on what you might need to carry. No, it might not necessarily be a replacement for a full-on headlamp, but with the pivoting head, it definitely does go a long way towards it. I also really like the glow-in-the-dark body. This is only on the white version. It is also available in this kind of smoky grey black, but the white version glows in the dark, and that is something I'm fond of purely just because I like glow in the dark. You could make an argument that you could see it easier if you have to grab it in the dark, sure. It's mostly just fun for me. It does actually have pretty good glow qualities. It glows pretty bright and for a decent amount of time after actively charging it up. The glow from like room light level or daylight level, fairly minimal, but in the dark space you might be able to see it just fine. And I really like the tail design. I said this in the V15, but getting a flat bottom so you can tail stand in a light is actually something I really appreciate. Being able to ceiling bounce so that you can light a room with very little power is excellent in my opinion, and the added utility with the flexible head is just great. But the fact that you get that flat bottom along with a magnet strong enough for you to attach it, vertically, horizontally, and a well-designed lanyard hole. That's just great overall. The red light inclusion is also very good. I mean, red light is a little better for use at night, does preserve your night vision a lot more, and it's just a nice option for you to have, especially, again, if you're going to be using it as a headlamp. I also do like that the UI is split between 2 buttons. Other brands such as Rovivon put it between 1 button. That obviously means that you can have a smaller light, but more button press sequences, and it's a little harder to get used to. This is just more intuitive a little bit, in my opinion. I do also like that it has the option of UV. UV is something that a lot of people won't use, but it's nice to have access to, even if you only ever use it occasionally in your life. Now onto things that I'm not particularly fond of or could be improved. I've already touched on the button cadence, the timing. It's just weird. It's hard to get used to, and it's unintuitive when not only every other flashlight I've ever used prefers quick presses being more intuitive, but their own lights use quick presses as well. So this, I don't know if it's a fault of my unit. It seems like it's intentional, and I would really rather they go back to it, but it is something you can get used to, especially if this is going to be your primary light. I'm also not a fan of the branding change. So on the bigger light in the V15, you actually have a smaller logo, and it actually looks a lot better. When you have this big blown up logo, you don't get full white. You can see it's a little hard to see up close, but it's actually a bunch of white lines making up the text, and you can see the black underneath. It doesn't look quite as nice, and all of this billboarding on the back is less than ideal. These are nitpicks, but when I'm coming from reviewing another product that they did, it does stand out. And ideally, the less billboarding on any EDC product is just more advisable. We prefer not to be walking adverts. Now, this light is USB-C rechargeable. It is IP67 water resistant and is protected by a rubber flap down here. And this is something that gave me grief. So I did not think this charged at first, and that is purely because of this USB port. So again, I'm going to make a direct comparison because it makes the most sense here. So the design of the V15 flap is to go into the socket itself. You can see that it mimics the shape of a USB-C port, and it actually seats into the port. That's not how it's designed on the V20. On the V20, it's a solid, just little flap, and it's creating the seal by filling in on top. What this means is that the USB-C port itself is very sunken into this space, and this is not a wide space. This is another example of this kind of flap. This is the IF23 from Sofin. As you can see, this is another flat tab style of cover. However, you have a lot of recessed space around to accommodate the USB-C cable. Now, what this means primarily is that you just straight up cannot use a lot of USB-C cables because the housing around the connector is too large to get in there. They include a cable with it. That cable works just fine. So you could argue that's not really an issue, but part of the benefit of having a standard like USB-C is that you can use your cables across all of your devices, and that makes it a little harder. But something else, and the real reason I thought this wasn't just charging, because obviously if you can't get the cable in, you know that, right? So this is the cable that comes with it. It's plugged into a power bank. No power. You have to really push before you actually get it to charge. This is, once you know that that's what it wants, that's fine, but that's more pressure than I typically want to put into plugging a cable into a piece of electronics to charge it. So at first what I was doing was just, plugging the cable in. Looks like it's in. I felt the friction of pushing it in, but it's not all the way in. You have to really push it. And I think, and again, this might just be my particular model, but I don't think this USB-C port is fully centered. You can clearly see the outside. Let me get something to point with here. You can clearly see the outside of the port on this side, but on this side it actually looks like it's inside this part of the housing. So I think, and this might just be a QA thing for my particular model, but I think that this needs to be shunted slightly over here, and that would probably alleviate that issue. But ideally, I wouldn't want to see such a design of USB-C port. It's just needlessly restrictive. USB-C charging is great though. Otherwise, on the improvement side, I would really rather that the modes, as I said earlier, did not step down except in high mode. Doesn't make sense. Their other models don't do it, other flashlights tend not to do it, and you get weird brightnesses at those lower levels because of that. And they should really include step down times in the manual as well. The siren is also something that I'm a little confused about why it's included. Now, you could make an argument for hiking, perhaps. You've fallen, you need to get attention. So a little bit of flashing along with a high pitch noise could get their attention. That's just fine. What confuses me most is that something like this might mostly resonate as a personal alarm, which is a personal safety device, but you can't really use it that way here. I mean, you have to hold the button down to trigger it, which is awful for that function because it means that somebody can easily stop you using it. And for both functions, it just doesn't seem quite bright, well, not bright, but it doesn't seem quite loud enough to get the job done. I don't have a lot of experience with personal sirens, but it just, from using it in an enclosed space where the sound is also bouncing back to me, it doesn't seem quite loud enough, and I kind of feel like if it had been excluded, the light could have been a little lighter, it could have been a little cheaper. I just don't get why it's included. And if it's there, you are at least once probably going to do it accidentally, and it's unpleasant to do accidentally, like strobing yourself in the face. But at the same time, I do applaud Boruit for trying to put different features in here. It does kind of push the envelope a little bit of what an EDC flashlight can be, and I do like that innovation as well. So that's all I have to say on the Boruit V20. Sorry, the naming convention, very hard, but this is my second Boruit product. Overall, very happy with both of them. Would be happy if the buttons were a little bit different here, but I think this is a great light. If it's going to be your primary light, you're going to get used to those button presses very quickly. This video has run on a little longer than I expected. However, I will be putting beam shots, as some people have requested those, into a short, and I'll try and link that in this video. So if you want to see what this looks like at night, then please go ahead and jump over to that short. I did do my best to try and show that off, and I will say that using it whilst walking around, it is very capable as a walking light. But that's just what I think. Have you guys tried the V20? Are you interested in the V20? Out of the two of them, V15, V20, which ones would you guys pick? Let me know in the comment section down below. Whilst you're down there, please hit that like and subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, I hope you, yes you, have a wonderful rest of your day.